Jamie Campbell Bower's story is not one of overnight fame or effortless success. It is a slow-burning testament to obsession, resilience, and the kind of quiet suffering that most people never see behind the spotlight because long before the red carpets, before the screaming fans, before the chilling intensity that made the world stop and stare, he was simply a boy navigating rejection, self-doubt, and an industry that constantly tested whether he truly belonged, born in London with creativity in his blood and music echoing through his childhood. Jamie grew up surrounded by art, yet never guaranteed a place within it, and that contradiction shaped him early. Because having access to creativity does not mean you are spared from insecurity. And for Jamie, insecurity became fuel rather than an obstacle, pushing him deeper into his craft when others might have walked away. And when he first stepped into acting, the roles didn't come with applause or validation. They came with uncertainty, typecasting fears, and the unspoken pressure to prove he was more than a fleeting face, more than a pretty aesthetic, more than a name people would forget after the credits rolled. And this pressure followed him relentlessly as he entered massive franchises early in his career, standing on enormous sets while still internally questioning his worth because fame arrived faster than confidence, and success arrived before certainty, and instead of feeling triumphant, he often felt exposed, as if the world was watching someone who hadn't fully figured himself out yet. And this internal conflict became one of the defining forces of his journey, because Jamie never chased fame for comfort. He chased roles that demanded emotional risk, roles that required him to confront darkness, vulnerability, obsession, and identity, and that choice came with consequences, including periods of isolation, intense self-criticism, and moments where stepping away felt easier than continuing, yet he stayed, not because it was easy, but because something inside him refused to let go, and that refusal is what separates those who pass through fame from those who are transformed by it. Because Jamie's career is not a straight line upward, it is a series of transformations, shedding skins, breaking expectations, and rebuilding himself through characters that mirrored his own internal battles, from romantic figures to tortured souls, from misunderstood outsiders to deeply unsettling presences. Each role became a layer of self-exploration rather than performance alone, and this commitment demanded sacrifice, including mental strain, creative exhaustion, and the courage to admit when things were falling apart. And when he stepped away from acting for a time, it wasn't failure, it was survival. Because sometimes the bravest move is not pushing forward blindly, but stepping back to reclaim your sense of self. And during that period, music became more than a side passion. It became a lifeline, a space where expression didn't require approval, where emotion didn't need to be filtered through scripts or expectations. And through music, Jamie found a different kind of honesty, one that later deepened his acting rather than distracting from it. And when he returned sharper, more grounded, and more fearless, no longer chasing validation but commanding presence. And this evolution became unmistakable when the world witnessed his transformation into one of the most haunting antagonists of modern television, a performance that did not rely on loud menace but psychological depth, restraint, and an unsettling calm that revealed years of inner work behind the scenes, and suddenly audiences saw what had always been there. Not just talent, but intention, not just intensity, but control. And that moment wasn't accidental, it was earned through years of being underestimated, misunderstood, and quietly persistent. Because Jamie Campbell Bower is proof that growth does not announce itself loudly, it accumulates silently until the moment arrives when the world can no longer ignore it. And what makes his journey inspiring is not just the success, but the honesty with which he has spoken about fear, anxiety, identity, and the pressure of expectation, especially in an industry that often rewards denial over self-awareness. And by choosing vulnerability over invincibility, he has reshaped what strength looks like for artists navigating public scrutiny, showing that masculinity does not require emotional numbness, that intensity does not require cruelty, and that darkness can be explored without being consumed by it. And for anyone watching his rise and thinking it was sudden, the truth is far more powerful, because nothing about Jamie's journey was instant. It was layered, patient, uncomfortable, and deeply human, and that is why his presence resonates. So strongly now because audiences can feel the authenticity behind the performance. They can sense the lived experience behind the eyes, and they can recognize the difference between someone playing a role and someone embodying it. And as his career continues to expand across acting, music, and creative expression, what remains constant is his refusal to be confined, categorized, or simplified, choosing instead to evolve even when evolution comes with risk. And that choice is the real lesson embedded in his story, that success is not about becoming what others expect, but about becoming honest with who you are, again and again, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you time, peace, or certainty, because in the end, the most compelling figures are not those who never struggled, but those who transformed struggle into depth. And Jamie Campbell Bower stands as a living example that the shadows you face can become the very source of your power if you are willing to confront them rather than run. And that is why his journey doesn't just entertain, it inspires. Because it reminds us that becoming extraordinary is rarely about talent alone, but about endurance, self-reflection, and the courage to keep evolving when the world is watching. And as the world began to recognize him not just as a familiar face but as a force, Jamie Campbell Bower entered a phase of his life where silence became louder than applause. Because recognition has a strange way of amplifying everything you thought you had already resolved, and instead of easing the pressure, success sharpened it, forcing him to confront the reality that visibility does not heal insecurity, it exposes it. And this exposure demanded a deeper reckoning with his own boundaries, his mental health, and the cost of embodying characters that live in the shadows. Because when you pour yourself into darkness with sincerity, it does not simply disappear when the cameras stop rolling. It lingers, it asks questions, it tests your ability to return to yourself, and Jamie learned this not through theory but through lived experience, through nights where the line between character and self blurred, through moments where the weight of expectation pressed against his chest heavier than any script ever could. And yet, instead of numbing himself to survive, he chose awareness, a choice that required more discipline than denial ever would, because awareness means you feel everything, the fear, the doubt, the exhaustion, but you also feel the clarity, the purpose, and the slow rebuilding of trust in yourself. And this rebuilding did not happen publicly, it happened in quiet routines, in conversations that never made headlines, in the deliberate decision to protect his inner life even as his outer life expanded, and this balance became essential as his performances grew more demanding because the world was no longer just watching. It was analyzing, dissecting, replaying his expressions frame by frame, turning nuance into obsession, and rather than shrinking under that microscope, Jamie refined himself, understanding that true control does not come from resisting attention, but from mastering your response to it. And this mastery showed itself in the way he spoke about his work, never glorifying darkness, never romanticizing pain, but acknowledging it as a tool, a language, a means of exploring the complexities of human nature rather than a destination to live in, and that distinction is what elevated his artistry beyond shock value into something lasting. Because anyone can portray intensity, but not everyone can carry it with responsibility. And responsibility became a recurring theme in his evolution, responsibility to his craft, to his audience, and most importantly to himself. Because burnout does not announce itself dramatically, it creeps in quietly when passion is exploited rather than respected. And Jamie's willingness to step back when necessary protected the longevity of his career in a way relentless ambition never could, and as opportunities multiplied, he became more selective, not chasing volume but depth, choosing projects that challenged him psychologically rather than simply expanding his visibility. And this selectiveness signaled a shift from proving himself to honoring himself, a shift many artists never achieve because they confuse momentum with meaning, but Jamie learned that meaning sustains momentum far longer than fear ever will. And alongside acting, music remained a parallel expression of his identity, not a backup plan, but a different language for the same emotions, allowing him to process experiences that acting alone could not fully contain. And through this duality, he built a creative ecosystem that did not depend on a single industry's approval. And that independence is subtle but powerful because It reduces desperation, and when desperation disappears, authenticity thrives, and audiences can sense that they may not articulate it consciously.